Hello and welcome back. Right, today I'm going to go through why I like Metropolix as my main sequencer. For most of the things that I do, the kind of things that you see me doing on here with kind of fast, sort of maybe acid or techno bass lines, I love this thing and I'm going to demo why I love it, and it's all to do with polyrhythms. Now, if you've got the old Metropolis, then you can follow along. I'm not going to be using anything around here, so don't worry about that. We're just going to be on the standard length ALM scale, and all we're going to do is be using this section here. I'm just going to be using an oscillator today. I've picked the Antlantis just because I don't have to patch too much for you guys. You'll be able to follow on a lot easier. This just gives me built-in filters and things like that. So we'll be sequencing the Antlantis here, and then we'll just be sending the Antlantis out through some sound effects here with the Mimeophon, going through a compressor, side chaining to a kick drum. All we're going to have is that one kick drum, and that'll be it. So we'll go through the patch from scratch, and we'll go through just how good this thing is to just come up with polymorphic bass rhythms. Okay, let's get started, and we'll start by patching our clocks. So pretty standard. You've probably seen me do these clocks before, but we have our main clock. So if we start this here, got my main clock here on channel 2, and then when we hit the reset and then play, you see this sends a reset. So I'm going to send my clock into my mult at the top, and then the reset into the second mult, and then we'll just clock the Metropolix here. We'll clock the Mimeophon, and then we'll clock and reset our drum sequencer here. This is just going to give us 4 on the floor. I'd normally use Steppy, but Steppy's still in my other case, so we're just going to use the dot, and these two kind of work very well together. Won't be using anything else, just the kick drum. So let's get that wired up as well. I've got some really long cables here, just to keep it out of the way. So we'll send our clock here, we'll send it around the outside of our case, and into the clock of the dot, and then just the same with the reset. So send that reset, take it up around the case. So that's clock and reset there, and then we will send a clock and a reset into a Mimeophon. Sorry, just a clock, and then finally let's clock and reset the Metropolix. Okay, so that's the boring stuff out of the way. Let's just make sure that we've wired that up okay. So we've got the Metropolix going along here. Press stop. Yep, that's stopped. And then reset should go back to the beginning. Yep, that's worked fine. And then the same here with the dot. Yep, that's working. I just like the dot to be on manual mode here, so I can just mute and play this here. Okay, right, so that's the boring part out of the way. What should we do next? Let's just... shall we start with the drums? No, let's start with the Metropolix. So I always start with the Metropolix in its bass refault position. So pull all the sliders back so we've got no CV coming through for pitch. Pull all these sliders back so we're all on single note. But then I also pull the gates or the gate types all the way back as well. So we end up with no notes playing. Now I'll come to that in a minute. So let's start by sending let's send a gate to Metropolis. Then we will also let's wire up the pitch as well. I'll come to pitch later. It's not so important for this. We might do some pitch in a bit. And then our output, let's just turn off the Mimeophon for now. Now the reason I'm going to send this through here anyway is because I'm going to use my first 2 VCAs here. I'm going to hard pan them left and right just to give us a nice stereo field. So let's send that, and we'll send that into the compressor. If you haven't used a compressor before, I highly recommend them. If you're using a kick drum, things like Kickane have one built in. But if you're doing anything with a kick drum and you want to create that nice pumping effect, then you're going to want to send it through a compressor. So then let's send the output of channel 1 to 1, 2 to 2, and then now I've got this wired up on channel 3 on ES9 here, which is going out to Ableton, hard panned left. And output 2 to channel 4, hard panned right. Now normally I'd have my sidechain in Ableton, but I've turned off all effects so that you can hear everything in the case today. Nothing's happening outside the case at all, apart from some mastering for YouTube. That's it. Okay, let's have a quick listen to that. Now, nothing's coming through yet because all of these gates are off. So let's just turn one gate on. That's about as boring as you can get. Now, let's just turn on all the gates. So everything's coming through there. And then we'll just bring up the Mimeophon. And the Mimeophone's just there to add some effects so that when we plug in the drum, we'll get some nice kind of drone in the background. What's going on here is the color, so this is filtering quite highly, so this is basically a low pass filter with a little bit of reverb and a little bit of clocked delay going on. Actually, let's just plug an LFO, a slow moving LFO, into our filter. So as this LFO moves now, it's just going to take this filter up and down. Okay, nothing exciting going on there. Let's get the kick drum wired in, and then we can listen to the pumping effect on a standard full 8 gates coming through here, and then I'll show you how I use this for polymorphism. In fact, let's just switch that off. Let's just switch that off until I've actually got this kick drum wired up. Okay, so let's wire up the kick now. So actually, we'll just switch let's just switch clock back on, and then we'll go through wiring up this. So first of all, kick comes out of channel 1 of the dot sequencer. Now I could just plug that straight in here so that we get output, and then send the output of that kick. I always have my kick on channel 14. So you can now hear that kick playing. But in order to sidechain that, we need to send it to the sidechain input of the compressor here. So I need to mult this out. So let's plug this into this little Intellijel mult box. Send that into channel 1. But then also, let's send that into our sidechain here. So now we've got the pumping effect. Switch off the kick. So there's our starting point. 8 notes, all playing in sequence and just pumping against the kick. So what makes the Metropolix worthwhile? I'll tell you what. Let's switch all these off. So there's our kick. Right, let's turn the kick off. Now, what makes the Metropolix worthwhile? I'll tell you what. So now we've got all of these gates off. Let's create an uneven pattern length. So if I switch all these on, we have 8 notes. Let's switch one off. So that's made it a little bit more interesting. Let's create step 5 to have 2 notes. So now we have a 9-note pattern with 1 off. And then maybe on 8, let's set that to 3, so this will give us 11 notes. With 1 rest. Put the kick back in. So you can see now how this is evolving over the 4 on the floor kick. 11 notes. Always use an odd number of notes, and it makes it interesting. The next thing we can do is start putting some skips in. So if we go to the skip here, and maybe let's skip lots of notes. So let's skip 8, maybe 5, 2. So what we have now is 1 note, 1 note, 1 note, 1 note, 1 note. So that's effectively exactly the same as our original 8-note pattern. Now why is that useful to have? Well, we can just switch one on and off every now and then. So let's put a rest in. So instead of having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we'll go up to 6 but with a rest. That's instantly improved the bass line. Maybe bring 5 back in. Now that sounds a little bit repetitive. Why does it sound repetitive? It's because we've got an even number of notes again. 1, even though that's a rest, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's always repeating. Maybe just take this one up to 3 to give us 9. It's evolving again. So let's go back to our full, all 8 notes on, which is our 11-note sequence here. Let's try something else. Let's try muting 5, 6, 7, 8. So now our sequence is 6 notes long, which is an even number, but having the rest in there is helping. Yeah, so we can play around with muting different notes here, and then that instantly gives us different polyrhythms. That's changed again just by putting that one extra note in. Okay, the next thing we can do after skips is we can start playing around with probability. So let's go back to something that's predictable again. Let's go to so 3 notes, they're always on, so that's effectively the same as our standard 8-note sequence. Now let's take note 4 here, and let's just reduce the probability down on step 4, maybe 2/3. So that's almost like skipping step 2, but only skipping it 1 every 4 notes. Go back to our skip, bring all the notes back in. See how it just skips step 4 every now and then? So you can see just by playing around with these pulse counts, which is unique to the Metropolis, and also I think it's the R185, is it, that originally started using these sliders. If you're interested in the history of this, God himself, who actually recently commented on one of my videos, which I was very grateful for, which I'll come to in a minute. But he's done a great video on where these 8-position switches came from. There's quite an interesting backstory, so if you're interested in that video, I'll put a link to it up here because it's really worth watching. So just before we finish up with this patch, let's just put some pitch in, because we've got the 1 volt per octave coming in here. So maybe step 3, let's just put something on there. So now we've got some pitch coming through. That when we start skipping some of those steps, that really changes things. So let's try skipping something with some of the pitch on it. So let's skip step 5. Maybe 7 as well, so we just have this one giving us extra pitch. So I mentioned Mylar Melodies commented on one of my videos recently, and it was to do with something to do with the Antlantis, and we got into a slight discussion about sliders versus knobs. And I love a good slider. We all love a good slider for volume. But one interesting thing that he mentioned was that sliders are not quite as sensitive as rotary. So if you can actually press, if you press really hard on these and you turn, you get very, very fine control as you press harder. The sliders on here are so sensitive, and you can't press on them hard. It's really difficult to get quite a tiny, fine-grained control. So I do love these sliders, but yeah, they're not as sensitive. So let's just bring all these back down to. So that's it. I just wanted to go through how easy it is to create some polyrhythms using the Metropolix. Always start with all the gates off. Switch on most of them, but leave maybe one or two rests, and then just make sure you've got an odd number of notes here. So just by going up to 2 there gives us 9 notes, and that instantly then starts rotating around the kick, and then just have fun with it. Now I mentioned here I've not touched anything else here apart from using some probability and some skips. Now, you're probably thinking, well, you know, you've been playing around with some different things here to create different lengths, and you have a length here. Now, the length, interestingly, it's not something I use a lot. When I'm just in this kind of mode where I'm just playing something quite simple, I don't really use the length. But where the length comes into its own is when you start using the second channel here, and you're setting different lengths across these 8 sliders, because it comes out better than I would expect to have different pitch notes here. So maybe have 8 pitch notes on a melody, but then maybe only 3 notes. Just set the length to 3 on the second channel here for your bass line, and the 2 play really, really well together. And then again, you can start playing around with the different rests and probabilities, and it interacts really, really well. So if you want to see something where I use a bass line and a lead both off the Metropolix, I'll do a video on that. Just let me know in the comments if you want something like that. But yeah, thanks for watching, and click the like if you did. It does mean a lot. It does help the algorithm get this out to more people. And if you haven't yet, please feel free to click subscribe. It's not compulsory, but it doesn't cost anything. And if I see more people subscribing, then I'm more likely to make more videos because I know people are liking it. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.